Greetings, dear subscribers and free listeners of my channel. At the time of The Hobbit, the dragon Smaug was one of the most powerful and terrifying creatures in all of Middle-earth. In terms of strength, he was only slightly inferior to Sauron himself, and Gandalf greatly feared that Sauron might one day form an alliance with the dragon. If that happened, the chances of defeating them would have dropped almost zero. Smaug, as you may recall, single-handedly destroyed the great city of Dale and ruined an entire dwarven kingdom, so calling him weak would be absurd. Yet what if I told you that Smaug was far from the most fearsome representative of his kind? In this world, there were dragons much more formidable, so hide away your golden jewels and let's begin the story. Dragons were created by the great enemy Morgoth, also known as Melkor, the master and teacher of Sauron. He brought these fire-breathing beasts into existence in the distant ages when all of Middle-earth trembled under his wars against the other Valar. One of the first to wage war against Morgoth were the mighty Noldor Elves. Soon, Morgoth realized that orcs alone were not enough to defeat them, and thus he created the first fire-breathing dragon. Later, building on this, he bred flying dragons as well. These beasts became invaluable in his wars against elves and even against the Valar themselves. There was even a moment when Morgoth's flying dragons drove fear into the Valar, beings who, let us remember, were each far more powerful than Sauron. Compared to his predecessors, Smaug was practically a child. Now, few Tolkien fans know that there were several different kinds of dragons in Middle-earth. Let's briefly go through them. Flying fire-breathing dragons, or ramlocks. This is the type we all know well, to which Smaug belonged. They were large, terrifying, and extremely destructive on the battlefield. Crawling fire-breathing dragons, or Uraloki. These were the first dragons, and despite lacking wings, they caused endless trouble for elves fighting Morgoth. Cold drakes. These dragons could not breathe fire, but that did not stop them from wreaking havoc on dwarves and men. Sea serpents, or Lingwiloki. Tolkien mentioned these water-dwelling dragons only once, but it is likely they were mighty creatures who helped Morgoth sink elven ships. Among the mightiest dragons, aside from Smaug, a few deserve special mention. Glaurung, the very first dragon. He could not fly, but he was vast, breathed fire, and possessed powerful sorcery. It is believed that the spirit of a Maya resided within him, which made him even more formidable. Ankalagan the Black, the greatest of all winged dragons. Ankalagan was Morgoth's trump card in the war against the Valar. He was so enormous that he blotted out the sky, his size comparable to mountains themselves. When the Valar first beheld him leading an army of winged dragons into battle, they were struck with terror and fled before him. Scatha, the mightiest of the cold drakes. For years he terrorized the peoples living near the Grey Mountains. Though he could not breathe fire, in strength he was likely equal to Smaug. But what became of all these dragons in the wars against elves and the Valar? Morgoth lost most of his greatest beasts. Ankalagon the Black was slain, and in his death throes he destroyed an entire mountain range. Glaurung had already fallen earlier. Scatha was killed by men, another cold drake by dwarves, and Smaug's end we already know well. Tolkien hinted, however, that some dragons survived even after Sauron's downfall. Yet by then their kind had diminished, growing smaller and weaker as the ages passed. After Smaug's death, most believed the age of dragons had come to a final close. Songs sung in the halls of men and dwarves told of them as a vanished terror, an ancient curse that had burned itself out in its own hunger for gold and ruin. Yet Tolkien, ever the careful weaver of myth, left enough shadows between his words to allow us to wonder, what if they were not all gone? The thought alone unsettles the imagination. For even a single dragon, lurking in some forgotten cavern, would be enough to tilt the balance of Middle-earth once again. When the Grey Mountains fell silent after Scatha's slaying, many assumed that the last of the cold drakes had been extinguished. Yet dwarven legends whispered differently. Old miners of the Iron Hills claimed that the earth itself sometimes groaned with distant rumblings, as though titanic bodies shifted deep below. "It is only the stone settling," said the more practical minds. But others believed those tremors were the restless stirrings of creatures that had withdrawn beneath the roots of the mountains, hibernating in ages-long slumber, waiting for a time when the world would forget them. The possibility of such survival is not entirely without reason. For dragons, unlike orcs or trolls, were not merely beasts of corrupted flesh. They were, in part, spirits of fire and malice clothed in terrible form. Glaurung himself had been something more than animal, his gaze enslaving hearts, his words dripping with a power that twisted destinies. If the essence of these spirits could not be fully destroyed, then perhaps some fragment lingered on, either wandering bodiless through the dark places of Arda, or bound still to scales and bone, hidden from mortal eyes. There are also the tales from the far north, beyond even the lands of Angmar. Little is known of those frozen wastes, for men and elves seldom dared to tread there, and few, who did, returned. But among the Lossoth, the snow-dwellers of Forochel, strange stories persisted of vast shapes moving beneath the auroras, wings like thunderclouds sweeping across the horizon. "The cold drakes," they whispered, those who never breathed fire but instead exhaled the chill of death itself. If their stories were true, then the line of Morgoth's beasts did not wholly perish, only retreated to the edge of the world, where the hand of the Valar was weakest. And what of the sea dragons, the Lingwiloki, mentioned only once in the lore? Their mystery is greater still, for water hides more than earth, and oceans are deeper than any cavern. When Morgoth's fortress of Angband was destroyed, and his armies scattered, who can say how many of his creatures were drowned, and how many swam free into the abyssal dark? The mariners of Tírdan spoke of shadows trailing beneath their ships, larger than any whale, keeping pace for leagues before vanishing into the depths. It may be that Morgoth's designs for domination by sea were never fully realized, but the remnants of his attempt might yet glide unseen through the waters, forgotten by all save those who dare to sail too far. If we imagine even a handful of dragons surviving beyond the recorded tales, the implications are staggering. Consider the world after the War of the Ring. The kingdoms of men flourished under Aragorn Elessar, trade was renewed, and peace seemed at last to spread across the lands. Yet what greater test of this new age could there be than the reawakening of one of Morgoth's ancient terrors? The strength of Gondor, though mighty, had always relied on walls and men. Could they have withstood the descent of a winged horror against which even the Valar once trembled? The dwarves, too, though enriched by the restoration of Erebor and their alliance with men, bore scars that never truly healed. Smaug's devastation of their home was still a recent wound in memory. The reappearance of another dragon, even one lesser than Ankalagan, would have driven them again to desperation. And perhaps that is why their songs of warning persisted, not only to remember past losses, but to keep alive the fear of what might return. But there is a deeper question. Why did the dragons fade? If Morgoth could create such beings once, could not Sauron, his most cunning servant, have attempted to breed them anew? Here lies one of the great mysteries. For all of Sauron's knowledge, it seems he never succeeded in reviving their kind. Some argue that he lacked the true creative spark of his master. Others believe that the making of dragons required not only skill, but also a sacrifice of spirit, a binding of Maya essence into flesh, a power even Sauron dared not expend. And yet what if fragments of that power remained hidden, stored away in forgotten artifacts, or etched into ruins of Angband buried beneath the sea? If ever some ambitious sorcerer or misguided king stumbled upon such remnants, the temptation to call forth a dragon once more might prove irresistible. Imagine a world where the pride of men led them to attempt what even Sauron refrained from, where a new dragon might be born, not from Morgoth's hatred, but from mortal greed. Would such a creature be any less dangerous, or perhaps even more so, for it would lack the ancient restraints that bound its predecessors to their master's will? The idea is terrifying, and yet it lingers like smoke from a long-dead fire. The legacy of dragons can also be seen in subtler ways. Their greed for gold and precious things seeped into the very consciousness of Middle-earth. Whole cultures were shaped by the memory of dragon plague, dwarves hoarding their treasures, men building fortresses against sudden calamity, elves singing laments of lost cities devoured by flame. Even in their absence, dragons ruled minds. Smaug himself was destroyed, yet the curse of his presence endured in whispers, in dreams, in the paranoia of kings guarding their vaults. Perhaps this was Morgoth's truest victory, that long after his fall, the shadow of his creations would live on in fear and in story. And what of Ankalagan the Black, whose death reshaped mountains? When he fell from the sky during the War of Wrath, his body crushed ranges that remain scarred to this day. Some legends say that fragments of his bones lie buried still, hardened like iron, indestructible by any smith's tool. The dwarves of Khazad-dûm once claimed to have found veins of strange black stone that burned the hands of those who touched it. Could this have been the fossilized remains of dragon scale? If so, then Ankalagan's shadow may still be written into the land itself, a reminder that such beings were not only myth, but matter of stone and ash. It is tempting to close the book on dragons, to declare their time ended with the fall of Smaug. Yet Middle-earth is a land where endings are seldom absolute. Evil has a way of lingering, waiting, reshaping itself in hidden corners. Orcs bred again after Morgoth's fall, trolls roamed still in Sauron's time. Even Balrogs, though believed destroyed, were found in deep places far later than anyone thought possible. Why then should dragons be any different? Perhaps in some desolate cavern beyond the sight of elves, in the ruined north where no king lays claim, a dragon sleeps even now. Perhaps the icy seas conceal shapes older than kingdoms, moving slow as the tides. Perhaps the bones of Ankalagan whisper to the stone, seeding nightmares into the dreams of those who sleep too close. These are only maybes, yet Middle-earth itself was woven of such maybes where legend and truth blurred into one. And so when we hear the old songs of Smaug, of Glaurung, of Ankalagan, we should not think only of what has been, but of what could yet be, for dragons, once unleashed, are not easily forgotten by the world. They are hunger given form, greed given wings, fire given a voice. As long as men crave gold, as long as kings guard treasure, and as long as shadow lurks at the edge of light, the memory of dragons will never die. And memory in Middle-earth has a way of becoming reality again.